You ever go out with a guy who is really attractive and really into you from the get-go? He's flirty, he's excited, he's making an effort. And it's not until later that you discover that the man you thought was a soulmate is really just a guy who's trying to get laid. If you want to get things right, you should listen to the rest of this podcast. My name is Marc Katz. This is the Love You Podcast. Thank you for joining me today. If you are a regular listener, or if you're even a first-time listener, subscribe on Apple, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Spotify, click the bell, do all the things to be notified when the next podcast comes out. Leave us a positive review if you haven't already. And that is all we're going to do with the initial housekeeping, because we have a very important topic to get to today. And sometimes in the course of coaching, that's really the most fun part of being a coach, is that in talking to people, you kind of figure out what your podcast content is going to be. So this is something that occurred to me recently when I was talking to a client on the phone, because she just fell into the trap that I led this podcast with. She slept with a guy on a second date, thought he was boyfriend material. Turns out he was not boyfriend material at all. Why does this thing keep happening? Well, it's because these guys present the same up front. They're virtually indistinguishable in their behavior, and everybody wants to know, how could I stop this from happening? So, at the beginning, all you got is minimal information. You have a profile, you have so you project onto the profile who you want that person to be. We all do it. We fall in love with total strangers based on a few pictures and a few words. And then we assume that the behavior at the beginning means something, right? The way he acts, and I know it's almost embarrassing to say it this way, but part of my Love You curriculum is no man is real until he's your boyfriend. He is just hope, fantasy, projection, and potential. So we always kind of try to read the last page of the book before we turn any of the pages of the book, and we sort of hope the book has a happy ending, and historically it rarely does. So at the beginning, guys make this effort to woo you, to win you over, to charm you, to get in your pants, to convince you that they're trustworthy. There's a whole bunch of things that are going on, and this is just very basic, courtship mating behavior that women like and men like as well. It's part of the dance. But even if a guy makes a great effort at the beginning to tell you that he's excited about you and how beautiful you are and how he can't stop thinking about you, that doesn't mean he's a good guy. It doesn't mean he's a bad guy. When a guy comes on really strong, doesn't necessarily mean he's love bombing either. The difference between love bombing and a guy who's really sincere in his excitement towards you is almost, I would say it's basically indistinguishable. This is why we drag out the dating process. This is why we move slower, because these behaviors are indistinguishable. So I want to break it down, as I talked about in the title of this, into three separate guys and three separate behaviors, but there's a lot of overlap between their behaviors. There's the guy who wants access to sex, there's the guy who wants access to becoming your boyfriend, and there's the guy who wants access to potentially be your future life partner and husband. And so the issue, and it's oft repeated here, because remember, everything I'm observing about men is not a defense of men, it's an observation about how they actually act, right? We're not going to shame them, we're not going to judge them, we're just going to observe them. So everything I'm describing is something you've seen in real life. It is not the way I think things should be, so let's not spend any time spending time trying to change men, right, and complain men are the problem. Why don't you just tell men who to tell you up front that they're just players who are trying to get laid, and leave the guys who want commitment for the guys who tell you on the first date that they want a commitment. It's just not how the world works. So instead of saying what should men do better, here's what you can do better to protect yourself, so you can distinguish the difference between these three men. So the guy who wants access to sex tends to lead with sex and little else. Now, most guys are not that overt. I mean, there is the guy who, sends the dick pics and starts with the dirty talk right away. And, if you choose to engage in that, I don't judge you for that as well. But know that the guy who leads with sex, and they all lead with sex a little bit, right? Men look for sex and find love. In the process of pushing the envelope, they discover, oh, I like her platonically as well. But we don't have enough data. We don't have enough information on these guys. So these guys tend to stay in that realm. They're the guys who text you at the last minute to see if you're up. These are the guys who'll text you at, on Friday night. These are the guys who are going to quickly invite you back to their place. They're just going to stay in that non-platonic place, remember, the pure physical attraction place. And they make much less of an effort in between texts because they don't want to. A, they don't want to make an effort. B, they also don't want to lead you on. I mean, sometimes there are guys who, blur those lines, and we'll talk about those guys next. But a lot of times, the guy who doesn't want a girlfriend really doesn't act like a boyfriend. He acts like a fuckboy. And so you shouldn't be terribly surprised when he becomes one. The problem is either they mask it really well, or you just go with the flow because you're really attracted to him and you hope that the guy you're sleeping with turns out to be boyfriend/husband material, and they rarely do, as evidenced by their behavior at the very, very beginning. So these guys are generally not going to escalate their behavior more than once a week. They want a once-a-week girl. They want a part-time, friend with benefits. And so their communication is going to be lagging. I don't really count texting as real communication. I know texting is real communication, but it's so easy to maintain. And if a guy realizes all it takes is a text a day to maintain access to once-a-week sex, don't confuse a guy who texts you every day and sleeps with you once a week for a boyfriend. That's a guy who texts you every day and sleeps with you once a week. If you agree to sleep with a guy before he's your boyfriend, and again, I know that I sound like your dad, but if you choose to put the sex part first, you're opening yourself to all of these guys. Right? Like that's the consequence. Is if you sleep with guys instantly or third date or something like that. I did it before. Like, I don't judge. Just know that all of these things are opened. Right? All of these questions, this guy I'm seeing, this guy I'm sleeping with, I can't figure him out. Does he want a serious commitment? I can't tell. The reason you can't tell is that you put the sex before the commitment. So stop doing that. A lot of these problems go away. The harder part is the next category of guy. And it's the guy who really is the boyfriend guy but doesn't want to be a husband. This guy is the greatest trouble. We could usually tell the difference between the fuckboys. I think we can. It's the guys who act almost like long-term relationship partners, right? But don't actually want a commitment. Those are the ones who really, really get you. So there's tons of them out there. They just want companionship. They really do want girlfriends, and they enjoy being good boyfriends. I have friends and relatives who are like this, guys who are in their 50s and never married, who are amazing boyfriends. And if you want to be with that guy, you only get to rent him. You don't get to buy him, and you don't get to keep him. So these guys might come on really strong at the beginning. They might push for sex because it's pretty normal, even for guys who want to get married, to push for sex because sex is exciting and fun, and a lot of guys could separate sex and emotion pretty easily. So we're not going to blame all guys for doing this. We're just going to recognize that a guy who pushes for sex, pushes for relationships, and pushes for marriage all act the same at the beginning. And so they make for good boyfriends, right? They genuinely do. And the problem with them is that in their head, commitment is optional. Long-term commitment is optional. Marriage is optional. Kids are optional. They're very much Mr. Right Now. They're very much staying in the present, and they don't want you to think about the future, right? Which is why they generally don't bring up the future. Right? They don't engage in husband behavior. Right? Husband behavior is leading towards the greater commitment. Right? Now, I'm using real life examples, and this is why this is hard, and this is why this is subtle, and it's not going to solve everybody's problems. Right? But I've got a friend who literally moved in with his girlfriend, bought a dog with his girlfriend. right? But always pump the brakes on marriage. And I'm going to use, we could talk about the different ways of having relationships. There's an upcoming episode on different forms of long-term relationships. I'm still a big believer in marriage as the gold standard for what a committed relationship looks like. And I don't think you should accept any substitute. Honestly, you shouldn't. When you start accepting substitutes, then you might discover that you are in a relationship which is equivalent of just boyfriend, girlfriend indefinitely, where he can break up with you like that, have a bad day, break up with you, kick you out of the house or leave the house. And there's not that commitment to the commitment that we associate with marriage. And so these guys are very seductive, and they're ultimately elusive. You never really get to feel like you're on firm footing with them. How can you tell who these guys are? Well, pay attention to how they lead and how they talk. All right, now, talk doesn't always equal action, but if you give someone enough time, they will reveal themselves. They just will. If you dated me when I was 35 or something, whenever I was dating my wife, this 18 years ago, you wouldn't be able to date me for a month, right, before we slept together, without knowing, A, this guy really wants to be married, B, this guy really wants to be a dad, right? You didn't have to pull it out of me. You didn't have to say, what are you thinking? What do you want in the future? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I would just volunteer the information. Part of the excitement of having a relationship is future pacing, talking about what you want. The guy who wants to get married and or start a family talks about getting married and starting a family. The guy who doesn't assiduously avoids the topic. Intentionally doesn't talk about it because he knows if he talks about it and she calls him on it, this thing's dead. He doesn't get laid. He doesn't get to become the boyfriend if she is looking for marriage and long-term commitment in that way. So those guys just don't volunteer the information, but they act like great boyfriends. They just never actually talk about a future in the same way or lead to the future in the same way. So you get stuck in this limbo where you think the relationship is escalating, but it's escalating only to a point. Right? You never get the long-term security that you want because you agreed to those terms in the first few weeks of dating. You didn't inquire further. You didn't inspect the house. And you don't have to interrogate him. Just listen to how he talks about things and those telltale signs. I don't know what I'm looking for. I don't know if I ever want to get married again. Right? What does that tell you? You're taking a risk that 2 years from now, when you're expecting a ring, the guy who said, I don't know what I'm looking for, is going to flip from a maybe to a yes. So that might be a 50% coin flip. That the guy you're going to invest all your time and energy and love in for the next 2 years turns into a yes instead of a maybe. Right? And you're allowed to do that. There's a lot of people who are sour on marriage who don't know. Their story is, well, maybe with the right person. That's a great excuse that everybody gives. I don't know. Maybe with the right person, I could change my mind. Right? But love you saying, believe the negative, ignore the positive. If someone's telling you there's a limit to how far this relationship is going to go, I would generally believe them and choose from the smaller percentage of people who actually believe in the institution of marriage, if indeed that's what you want. And again, I'm not here to convince you that's what you want. All right? Generally, people who come to dating coaches are people who've been through a series of boyfriends that didn't escalate to marriage or escalated to a dysfunctional marriage. So we're trying to make better decisions in the first 4 to 6 weeks. So this is what it means to be the CEO of your love life. It means slower pacing, higher standards for follow through. We want the guy maybe to start as a once a week guy, not sleeping with, but dating, and escalate to twice a week or 3 times a week, and going from texting once every 3 days to texting every day to talking every day to planning your weekends in advance to offering to take his profile down. It's giving that enough room. Again, we say 4 to 6 weeks. It's not a hard number, right? The whole point is you shouldn't have to be in a guessing game. You shouldn't wonder What does he want ultimately? You should be headed in that direction and exploring it together. My wife and I both wanted marriage and children. The only question was whether we do it with each other, not whether we wanted the same thing. So establishing similar goals early is important. And again, it doesn't have to come through interrogation. It comes from allowing himself to reveal himself and paying attention to what he is omitting. Right? You don't have to outsmart men. You just want to stop rewarding men for doing the very bare minimum. Right? He sleeps with me. He texts me. He pays for dinner. I like him. That is very, very different. That will literally get you into a great situationship. All right. That's a really safe way to get into a situationship. All right. I like him. He pays for dinner. He wants to sleep with me. And he says he wants to be exclusive. He sleep with me exclusively. That's not a good long-term plan. So if you fall into this trap before, if you have trouble trusting your judgment, if you're listening to this podcast and being like, yeah, I understand kind of, but, right? My life experience is this is a lot more confusing. And I've never been able to suss out who the serious guys were from the players. That's exactly what we do in Love U. It's not how to write a sexy text message that you can get in a PDF by some other dating coach. It is literally the ability to stop getting hurt, wasting your time, operate from a place of confidence and abundance, trust your judgment, so you could see how the right man separates himself from the pack and you could feel secure while you're building a relationship instead of being on edge all the time because you have no idea what his intentions are. If that appeals to you in this new year, go to evanmarckatz.com/now, book a call to talk with me. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a positive review. My name is Marc Katz. This is the Love U Podcast. I hope we gave you something to think about here today, because I don't even know if there's anything more important than I could talk about than today's topic. This is where people get the most hurt, right? Is investing. It's like putting money into a bank account you can never withdraw from. The last thing you want to do is put your money on a risky investment because you didn't really read about what you're investing in first. So hopefully some of what you learned today you could apply to your real life. And if you have trouble applying this to your real life, and you've heard me say this before, go to evanmarckatz.com/now. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.